Erev Tov, good evening. Okay, wait one moment. One second. I'm going to share screen. Okay. I believe, are on page 334 of volume 10. Excuse me for being slightly hoarse tonight. You know, busy giving shiurim, you know. Okay, so we are hopefully finishing up 10. If we're lucky, we'll start 11 as well, if we're fortunate. So it depends how many questions you ask or do not ask. So, as always, please join in. And we are at the end of 10. We're discussing various preparations for tefillah, and we ended off last time, page 334. We looked at the Gemara, which brought various practices for the proper way to dress for tefillah. And we saw that in the Gemara here, so we're on page 334 in source 1, the Gemara in Masechet Shabbat, Daf Yud, brought these different minhagim. That Rava in source 21, Rava bar Rav Huna, he would rami puzmekei, he would have these special socks. He had his davening socks, his puzmekei, umatzli, and he would daven in these special socks and prepare to meet his God, right? Rava shade glime. Rava, in contrast, would take off his cloak or his jacket before he davened. And what was the reason? Amar, he said, Ka'avda kamei marei, right? He was like a servant in front of his master, and therefore he didn't want to be all dressed up, so he dafka removed his cloak. And he also, I forgot to say, fachar yadei, he also would put his hands together like a servant playing before his master, which was an interesting take on things. And we saw that Rav Kahana, depending on how, what was going on with current affairs, sometimes he would either dress better or dress worse, depending on whether he was davening like a slave before his master or not. And therefore the attire would reflect the mood. So I guess the Carlton fans among us will not be dressing too well at the moment. And based on this Gemara, that the mood basically reflected his attire. That was what we ended with last time, that this was the sort of the Gemara. We had the socks, we had the removing of the cloak. Rashi explains a little bit in source 22. Rashi Adlock explains, Rami Puzmakeh, why would one of them put on these socks? Noten and pilaot, he would put on these special footwear, chashuvim, important footwear, beraglav, uvela'az kaltus, whatever that is in Old French, these kinds of shoes or socks. Shadi glima, whereas Rava would remove his cloak. Mashlich adarto melav, he'd remove his cloak from upon him. Shelo yere'eka chashuv, he shouldn't look like an important person. Okay, and chovek yadav ve'etzbotav, he would put his fingers and his hands together in prayer. Okay, and that was martzir belaz, whatever martzir means in Old French. So he would interlock his fingers together. Adam hamitzta'er me'amat rabo, not just somebody who's pleading, but somebody who's mitzta'er, who's almost like in trouble due to the fear of his master. That is how Rashi understands these interesting practices and the way they would conduct themselves in tefillah. Okay, but do you have to wear special socks? Should we have, we discussed, obviously hats and jackets, but what about the socks? Why did the socks not take off? So Tosfot, over the page, source 23, explained that even if socks didn't take off as mandatory, nonetheless, something of that did seem to be mandatory, at least according to Tosfot in source 23, and that is the requirement to not daven barefoot other than special occasions. Tosfot, source 23, Rami Puzmakeh, they would put on socks. Mikandram, here we learn, say Tosfot, Yesh Lochich, you can prove, She'ei lihit palel yachef, one should not be davening barefoot. Ella b'tisha b'av Yom Kippur, only on Tisha b'av Yom Kippur. So we learn two things from here. Firstly, we learn that, you shouldn't be davening barefoot. We also learn that on Tisha B'Av and Yom Kippur, they wouldn't wear, fancy, whatever it is, fancy slippers, even that they just don't technically have leather in, but they would daven barefoot. That was just an interesting point for us to note. But prohibition to daven barefoot, it would seem, according to Tosfot, based on this Gemara. Now, I don't know about you, but often in Israel, people are, the culture is different. Certainly they don't wear socks with sandals in many places. and sometimes you even catch them, they take the shoes off. It's really terrible. It's like quite a culture shock when you first go there from England, and they were like, but Tosfot say that really one should not be davening barefoot. Certainly that was true in France in the Middle Ages, according to Tosfot.
Although the Kohanim used to do the avodah barefoot.
The Kohanim would do the avodah barefoot. This is true. That's why they also duchen barefoot. I don't think they were wearing socks in times of certainly not by Rishon, but it's not considered respectable for tefillah. Avodah, yes. Tefillah, no. And that's an interesting chiluk as to why that might be the case. Do you have a suggestion, Peter?
I have one.
Go for it, Jeff.
Well, it might have been embarrassing if they'd been treading on the red grapes to make the wine, and they had very stained feet.
Part of the reason the prohibition for duchening is actually quite specific. The duchening, they don't wear shoes because you don't want the people when they're on the duchan looking at their feet. But the avodah was definitely the opposite. Mora hamikdash means that really nobody's supposed to be wearing shoes on Har HaBayit. Out of Mora hamikdash, out of fear. So even anyone who goes onto Har HaBayit, obviously, even if you're not on Makam HaMikdash, but even on Har HaBayit, you're not supposed to wear leather shoes. As part of Mora HaMikdash. We don't have Mora HaMikdash in the shul. Some of us are scared to go to shul sometimes, but post-COVID. But sorry, scared of the rabbi, right? Yeah, not me, right? Okay. I'm just quoting Yitz here. That wasn't my joke. Okay, got to say it, b'shem omro. Own it. Good joke. So, but there's no sense of Mora Mikdash when it comes to the shul. We have cover Beit Knesset, but we know there are halachot which applied on Har HaBayit that don't apply to Beit Knesset. So the analogy of avodah and tefillah is obviously not a whole, is not perfect analogy. So shoes would be a classic example where dafka they wouldn't want to be barefoot for tefillah, even if avodah in the mikdash they would have been. Just a point to notice. Okay, let's have a look at the Shulchan Aruch, how he brings it. The Shulchan Aruch already shows that there is a certain subjectivity to this requirement regarding not wearing or what you can or can't wear for tefillah. If we look at Shulchan Aruch in Aruch Chaim Sadi Aleph in source 24, says the Shulchan Aruch, Lo ya'amod ba'apud danto, that one should not stand with a money belt. You shouldn't be wearing a money belt. V'lo barosh magula, or with an uncovered head when davening. V'lo baraglayim magulim, or uncovered feet. Im derech. But he qualifies, im derech anshe makom, if that's the usual way of people in that place, shalo ya'amdu lifnei gadolim el b'batei raglayim, they won't stand before great people with uncovered legs. In other words, if you don't go meet the Prime Minister dressed that way, then that's not appropriate attire for tefillah. So Israelis, they'll say, what do you mean? We'll go up to our dear Prime, who's our Prime Minister these days? Changes every other week. I think it's Lapid, right? So people meet Yair Lapid quite comfortably in sandals. I don't think people aren't. I'm telling you, people aren't fussed. So the argument is, listen, they do that. So this doesn't apply. But the Shulchan Aruch is the one who really shows its subjectivity. Im darich anshe hamakom, if it's the way of locals to act in that manner, that is what is kovea. That is what decides really what is considered respectable, which is both respectable but also respectful. And that is a very important clause which the Shulchan Aruch adds, which then is going to be elaborated further now in the Mishnah Berurah, who talks about different minhagim, different, wearing, he talks specifically different types of hats, socks rather, and other things, other attire, which we're going to see now. So if we look at the next source in the Mishnah Berurah, so in Yud Aleph, Sifkat Yud Aleph, but Apud Danto, in his in one's money belt, who Azor, right? Azor Chalol, it's a hollow belt. Shemisimim bo ma'ot, right? They store the money inside the folds of the belt. Ve'einenu derech kavod la'mod kelifnei Hashem. It's not respectful to daven before God in that way. V'chen, and similarly, adds Mishnah Berurah, ein nachon lehitzpalel b'kaptin. What's a captain? Some sort of robe. Uveveger tachton, or in undergarments, or b'shlafrak. Shlafrak is your night wear, right? Night attire, right? For schlafen, right? For sleeping, right? So the shlafrak, you also, Mr. Berurah here quotes in Chayadam, you're not supposed to daven in pajamas or in a dressing gown or the like, in your schlafrak. Okay? Hope your Yiddish is good. You're going to need it. Okay? Mogula, an uncovered head. Okay. So the question is, well, at least in Radin, in the times of the Chafetz Chaim and the Mishnah Berurah, what did that mean to be an uncovered head? Was the kippah enough? Or did you need your full hat, right? So it explains the Mishnah Berurah. It was Maneinu nowadays, says the Mishnah Berurah. It's not enough just to not be mogula, not to have an uncovered head, but also you have to wear a hat during davening. But look how he qualifies it. In the same manner that you go out in the street. Why, according to the Mishnah Berurah, you have to wear a hat? Because that's how you walk around outside. It's not enough with a small hat, i.e. a kippah, which is underneath your hat. Why? Why is that not enough? That's not how you stand before important people, right? Your kol sheken shlaf mitz. Even more so with your night hat, right? Your shluffen hat, right? Your night hat, your nightcap. Also, you cannot use for tefillah. So, in other words, again, why do you say you have to wear a hat? Because that's the way you walk around outside, and that's what you wear when you meet important people. That was part of the culture of the time. He adds there, which they've put bold here. Also, some sort of pants, shall pishtan, some sort of flax or cotton pants or socks. Levad is not enough. It's not enough. It will be inappropriate, disgraceful to daven in front of important people that way. And how much more so? Sandal, how much more so he wouldn't be happy with Israelis today, right? When you wear sandals with an uncovered calf, right? Right, so sandals where you can see your feet and your calves. Okay, it would not be appropriate in the Mishnah Berurah's context. Okay, he goes further. Not only that, but also what are you not allowed to wear? You're not allowed to wear gloves. Gam ein lilbosh be'et tefillah batei yadayim. You can't wear gloves. Shekorin. How do you pronounce this? Henshich, right? Henshich is gloves. Henshich. Kederech olrei drachim, in the way that travelers do. V'koreh ani alehem, and I apply to such a person. Pasuk from Tehillim. Al tavei regel ga'ava v'yad v'sha'im al tenideni. Right? Like, let not, how they translate that? Let not the foot of pride overtake me, or the hand of the wicked drive me away. Okay? But the idea that you shouldn't be wearing gloves when you're davening is not appropriate. You're on the way? No, you're there to stay. You're there to daven to Hashem. Chai Adam said that also just to wear woolen socks is also not correct. To the end of the day, it's all based on the local minhag. He brings here the Maharam Mintz, right? Haram Mintz, right? Moshe Mintz. Tiken, he also instituted you're not allowed to wear long shoes, aka boots, right? Right? Boots. You're not supposed to wear boots because in his town it was considered not appropriate to walk into shul wearing boots. But again, if that is the norm, the social norm, to go even in front of distinguished people in that way, it would be permitted in that town. So what we see from here, that the guiding principle is, what is the minhag hamakom? What is acceptable to stand before distinguished people in that location? And that is really the rationale for discussing all of this. So what does that mean for us? Mishnah Berurah said you're supposed to wear hats and jackets. Okay, but Piskei Teshuvot already, here in source 26, says that in a more Dati Leumi circles, that is less common. I can see at least 2 people on the chat who I know wear a hat at least on Shabbos. Of course, Dr. Katz here has his hat on in his photo throughout, but I don't think he has to wear his surgeon's cap. But I can see at least 2 other people here on the chat who, right, I can see, who wear hats on Shabbat. But the Piskei Teshuvot says it's basically got to be based what is the manner in that place. So let's see how he summarizes it in source 26. V'hinei. By the way, Dr. Ween, maybe you could clarify for us your minhag of wearing a hat. Is that a minhag? Because your father doesn't wear a hat, right?
It's for fashion.
Fashion, okay.
I like dressing up.
You like dressing up? Is the bow tie also, or is that also the?
No, the bow tie is practical.
The bow tie is practical, of course it is. Okay, say the shakoach. Okay, so let's see the Piskei Teshuvot inside source 26. V'hinei, behold, al pi hakala amar b'kol poskim. According to the rule in all the poskim, So criteria number one, it's got to be the way that you would walk around outside, i.e. not in your pajamas. The second criteria is how you'd stand in front of important people. As we saw that quote in the Mishnah Berurah before, according to the local minhag. If that's the case, says the Piskei Shavot, right? Those poor depraved people who from their youth went without a hat and suits, jacket. Even when they meet important people, they're not particular to dress in such a way. We shouldn't be mocha, we shouldn't complain against such people. Right? So if that's not the way you usually dress, then you shouldn't complain about such a person when they daven without a jacket and hat. He goes further, even those people who daven like in Israel without socks, places where they daven without socks, when people typically go without socks in the summer. And as I said, right, I think in Israel people would not feel embarrassed to meet the prime minister in sandals on their socks. They'd stand in front of distinguished, important people in that fashion. Right, even people who wear short sleeves. Also, right, shorts, right. Zulat, but he does make an exception. What's the exception? When they stand as shliach tzibur, when they go forward to be the chazan, then he disagrees. He says they need to daven accordingly. And also when they get an aliyah, they have to be dressed more respectfully, which is an interesting caveat that he puts there. Ulam, however, and has got reach Torah, any scent of Torah, should refrain from davening in this manner, short sleeves, shorts, no socks. Like Shulchan Aruch says, that only when they're completely wrapped up is the way that Chachamim and their students would daven. Okay, and that's how the Piskei Shavot summarizes things. So I was about to say something. Oh, the chat, no, all good. Okay, Beseder. But again, the guiding principle, Ikar Hadin, is that it's taloi on the minhag. Okay. Pnei Halacha, I'm not going to read it inside just due to time, but he says similarly in source 27, Rav Melamed, that in a community such as his, a Dati Leumi community where people didn't grow up wearing hats and jackets, it's not relevant to enforce that practice. Okay. They have a little bit here about the gartel. We're going to learn about the gartel. I think we covered it a little bit, but I'm happy to go through it here again. Gartel. Shtika kahoda. I see people will read about gartel here. Okay. Because we covered it briefly in the past, but we have it a bit more extensively here. In source 28, the Gemara Masechet Brachot, Daf Kaf Daled Amud Bet. Tanu Rabbanan, rabbis taught us, Haya yashen b'talitot. Somebody sleeping in their talit, i.e., in their garment, but they weren't dressed. They're just in in their covers, in their garment. But we saw this Gemara previously, and they can't take their head out from under. It's so cold, right? No heating, no fire, nothing, and they need to recite Shema. They're supposed to basically put as a chatzitza, as a barrier, the garment tight around their neck to make the tightness of the garment or the covers, the blanket around their neck as a separation between the body and the undressed body and their head. The correct Shema, and in that fashion they read Shema. Remember those that say al libo, they've got to be on the heart, but there's got to be some sort of separation we saw in the Gemara. If somebody who's undressed between their head or their heart and the makom ha'erva. Okay, the Gemara over the page, top of page 338, the Gemara continues. As for the Tanakama, the first opinion said you do it around the neck, not around the chest, but that means their heart's in the same section as their erva. Gemara explains, Kasavar, this opinion holds, Libo ro'et ha'erva mutar. That really, Libo ro'et ha'erva, it's okay if the heart is in the same place as one's nakedness, and therefore there's no prohibition. We discussed this in the past, I'm not going to go into it too much again now, but what we did conclude there is that the Shulchan Aruch ruled like the second opinion, like the Yesh Omrim, that one has to make a halachic separation between one's heart and one's erva, and one's nakedness, And therefore, if somebody is in a onesie and nothing else, that would be a problem. If it's loose garments. And Shulchan Aruch passes this way in source 29, in Aruch Chaim Sari Aleph, says the Shulchan Aruch, Sarich le'ezor b'shat tefillah. You have to wear a belt at the time of tefillah. Afilu yesh lo avnet, even if he already has like some sort of shorts, she'ein li bora te'erva, such that his heart does not see his nakedness, mishum, because of hikon, right? Hikon, this pasuk in Amos of hikon, right? You've got to be prepared to see your bora, to stand before God. Aval shar brachot mutz levarach b'lo chagura. Other brachos you don't need a belt. Machar sheyesh lemichnesayim, wearing pants is sufficient. Hagar as the Ramah, the reason being the ainli bora te'erva. Okay, so what does this mean practically? Practically, does one have to have a belt nowadays? So the Mishnah Berurah discusses this in source 30, based on these sources. That's the requirement of a belt, and then we'll discuss gartel as well. Okay, so in source 30 here, the Mishnah Berurah says tzarich b'diavad, right? Post facto. Im hit palel below azar. If somebody did daven without a belt, yatsa, one still fulfilled the obligation. The yesh omran owner, those that say further that this halacha of the Mishnah Berurah of the Shulchan Aruch, that you have to wear a belt, that's the dafka misha ragil kol hayom b'chagura. That's only if you always wear a belt. Aval misha holech kol hayom b'lo chagura. But if you go all day without a belt, gam b'shat tefillah ein sarich lachgar. Also, at the time of tefillah, you do not have to wear a belt. So, me'ikar hadin, somebody who doesn't wear a belt doesn't have to put an extra belt on dafka for davening. But mihu, however, he adds minag chasidut af b'chiyai gavna. It's a minag chasidut, even in that case, to put on a belt. I would amend this and say nowadays it's not a minag chasidut, but it's a minag chasidim, right? Nowadays, that the dafka for tefillah put on a belt, on an additional belt, I might even add, even if they're not wearing a belt, or even if they're already wearing a belt, it's a minag chasidim nowadays to put on an extra belt for shas and tefillah. But according to the Mishnah Berurah himself, mi'ikar hadin, strictly speaking, it is not required if somebody doesn't always wear a belt throughout the day. Avnet, wearing, even if he's already wearing an avnet, Rotzelama, this means, says the Mishnah Berurah, avnet shel michnesayim. It means the belt, the elastic, if you like, of one's pants, basically. Hamafsik bein libo la'erva. So this is all a discussion, this idea of a gartel, what we call a gartel, is even if somebody's got, obviously, pants on, and today's modern elastic, which is some sort of hefsek, the question is, do you need an additional belt? Mishnah Berurah says you don't need a belt if you don't usually wear a belt, but it's a minhag chasidus to add a belt as an extra separation for tefillah. Okay. Even one wants to be concerned that you have to, for sha'ar brachot, but not for tefillah, but for other brachas, one does not have to wear a gartel. Maybe I can see a couple of gartel wearers here. Manny Kingsley's a gartel wearer, and right, am I right? And Rev Ronnie Figdor is also a gartel wearer. He's holding up there. I see you now. Sorry, you're not all on my screen in one go because I'm sharing screen. Okay. So do you do this for shar brachot or only for tefillah?
In my case, at the start of davening, I put it on.
Aha. Okay. Say okay. Let's start by saying throughout tefillah. Okay. But not for Birkas Hamazon or something like that, right? Only for tefillahs. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so shar brachot says the Mishnah Berurah, who did the same thing applies Kriyat Shema. So even though there's those who have the minute to wear it for the entirety of tefillah, the Mishnah Berurah qualifies here that the requirement to have it is only for Amida. This is somebody who would typically wear a belt anyway, has to also have it for Mi'ikar Hadin, for tefillah. This is only for the actual Amida itself. Kriyat Shema is like shar brachot, like other brachos. Why? He explains, the lo shaykh hikad likrak elokecha. That pasuk from Amos, hikad likrak elokecha, is prepare to meet your God, is not shaykh to other parts of tefillah. It's only shaykh to Amida. Ki imisha omed lifnei hamelech. It's only when actually standing before God, i.e. in Amida, that it's shaykh. But nonetheless, we saw minhag chasidut is any way to do it, even if you do have a belt. And minhag chasidut, as Rabroni has pointed out, is throughout.
I was going to say there's an opinion, I think, in Rashi, in Talmud somewhere, and I think also Shulchan Aruch, that the belt or the gartel is really subordinate to the bekishel, to the kapatet. So really the gartel is because you're wearing a robe, like a loose fitting over, and it makes it look better. So it's part of that clothes, and you look better with a belt on outside that. But the custom with respect to Ronnie and other people of putting a gartel on top of like just regular clothes or a suit jacket makes no sense, because it certainly doesn't belong to those clothes, and it certainly doesn't make them look better. So the gartel was
that might be true
dressing
according
up.
to this. That might be true according to this Shita of Rashi that you're quoting. But according to the Mishnah Brura, who brings the Magen Gebarim, it's not based on being buttled to a garment or. But the whole reason we saw when we learned, as I said, we already touched upon this, but we're getting into it again. So, that was because it was a loose fitting thing, and you wanted to tighten a loose fitting beged. This is even if you have an avnet or an azor, still this is a minhag chasidut to add an extra one. So what you said might be true, but that's not what the Mishnah Berurah is referring to as the minhag chasidut, which is, as I said now, the minhag chasidim, which is what he's referring to here. Okay, well, okay, say it. Okay. We'll go over the page. I think Piskei Teshuvot. I think we've covered this. Piskei Teshuvot also says similarly that the Ikar Hadin nowadays, again, it's not necessary to wear a belt, and it's we're on page 339. So he also says that it's not obligated here, especially because nowadays everyone has elastic on their clothing anyway. All two garments, there's a natural separation anyway. I'm not going to read it inside. Rav Yitzchak Yosef rules the same way in the Yalkut Yosef in source 32. Just with the iron time, I'm going to move on to source 33, which is interesting. The Yalkut Yosef speaks about further requirements for attire. So here, I skipped those who lost me. We're at the bottom of page 339. So the bottom of page 339, and I'm just going to take 10 seconds to get some hot water. 1 second. Forgive me. You can argue about gartels while I get water.
Peter, perhaps I can share with you my discussion with Rav Moshe Heinemann some 45 years ago when I started wearing a gartel. Before I started wearing a gartel, I asked Rav Moshe Heinemann, why is it that it says in the Shulchan Aruch that one should wear a gartel? How come it does, even if you're wearing a pants with belt, why don't Litvisher people do it? He told me at the time because in the days of the Chofetz Chaim, who apparently used to wear a gartel, they didn't have buttons on their jackets, and the gartel was a way of closing up the jacket. But nowadays, if you've got buttons on the jacket, that should suffice. Interestingly enough, though, it doesn't appear that people are careful about buttoning up their jacket.
So the gartel, you're saying, I missed the beginning of that, Rabroni, but you're saying that the gartel was basically just a way of doing up the jacket rather than
as
having a separation.
I got that.
It wasn't connected to libora to erva.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, fascinating. So let's see inside here. The Yalkut Yosef brings a few other minhagim. One which was relevant to me, such a big issue, which people don't realize. Here, top of source 33, the end of page 339. Chayal, bringing a gun. You can't leave your gun anywhere. When you're in the army, you can't put your gun down. If you get in big trouble if you leave your gun unattended. We also know there's an issue to bring in Klei Zayin, to bring a weapon into a Beit Knesset. It's Aser. And it's really a big question about how you can do it. So the Yalkut Yosef rules here, and I wish more people would do it. Beginning of source 33. Chayal shenoseh imo neshek, so a soldier, right, who's carrying his gun. Mina ra'oi, it's appropriate. Shekodim shikanes beit hakneset, before he goes into shul. Yichaseh et nishko tachat b'gadav. You could seal it under his clothing. Shelo yira el achutz, it shouldn't be seen outside. Now this is all very good when you have a little gun, but in the army I had an M16, so that's not easily easy to hide, right? And so I used to put it's an issue. It's really an issue. You're not allowed to leave your gun unattended. So I'd put a bag over there. You're not allowed to also I don't know how you say it. You're not allowed to lift rocket and neshek. You know how you say that in English. You can't take the gun apart. You're not allowed to do that. So you get in trouble, especially when you're in basic training or advanced training. So we'd put it like, I'd put like a bag over the end of it or something like that, and it's all you could do. And then at a certain point in the I remember on my army base there was like a big cupboard, so like I used to sit next to the cupboard. I was crazy. I used to put my gun in the cupboard during tefillah and like stand next to it, and I could see my mifaked also, like he was dirty, so he knew I was doing it, so but he wasn't going to tell me off. He was like frowning at me, but being too frum as usual. But yeah, but really it's an issue to bring in, I think, but it's an important thing that the Yalkut Yosef's touching on here. You have people in Israel, and here it's not a thing, but you have people in Israel, and they stand at the Amud, and they have a pistol, fine, but they're standing there at the Amud, I'm sorry, with a gun, and I'm going to sound very left-wing here, but I'm sorry, you're standing with a gun, like, sticking out, or they get an Aliyah Torah, and then they're not like, even like concerned, like they're standing there with a murder weapon, like as part of just like their thing, and they're not embarrassing to cover it with a talit or to cover it with a jacket or with a jumper or something, and it's like just to show some sort of symbol. Like at the end of the day, okay, an eshek is necessary, certainly where certain parts of Israel, and it's important, but like to realize that it's also halacha, and like it's part of a cultural rant of mine, but I won't go into too much depth now. But this halacha is a very important one. You're in the house of God, you're supposed to cover up the neshek, supposed to cover up a gun.
Can't you consider your weapon like a tachshit, like it's an ornament?
So there was one suggestion, discussion, I think in the Misputei was the beginning of the state of Israel. They discussed this exactly how they're going to deal with it. Rav Ovadia wasn't a fan, and his son is quoting it here that it's really not ideal. But the idea. But I think also I personally have for cultural reasons in Israel, I think it's important that people, when they walk into a shul, feel the need to cover up the gun. I'm not saying don't hide it somewhere if you need it for security purposes, but do some symbolic act, cover it with your talit, do something. You're in a house of God. This isn't the time to be having murder machines sticking out of your pockets. Okay? That's my left-wing rant for the night. Okay. Not too many of those, but this is one of them. Okay. If it's not important, if it's not possible to cover it, because you've got an M16, right? And it's too big. Kogon rovek gadol, a big gun. V'chayal tzrich lisat nishko alav misakana bitchonit, because you need to cover it due to security danger. Mutar leitpalel kashen nishko alav. You're allowed to if you have no other choice, right? So he's makel stuck basically. That was one example. The classic Israeli case of the neshek, of the gun. Sif Daled. Mutar lemishu choleh. Classic case. I don't feel well. I'm davening at home. Do I really have to get dressed for davening? So, if you're actually sick, somebody who's actually unwell or anus, so they can't help it, lihit palel in pajama, they can daven in pajamas, or vilvad shezro'otav mechusot. He makes the condition here of your arms being covered. That again, we saw previously what was discussed in the Piskei Teshuvot, the idea about being, dressed respectfully. Ava below ones kaniskar, ein roy lihit palel in pajama, but without such an honest where you can't help it, you shouldn't be davening in pajamas. I.e., COVID lockdown is not an excuse to daven in pajamas. Okay, somebody who's sick and in bed, fine. Somebody who's just in lockdown, that's not a heter to daven in pajamas. And therefore, you'll bash chaluk ala pajama. So put at least put something on top. Okay, that's what he says. Okay, so that another case, the sick person in pajamas has what to rely on. Okay, what about
Rabbi,
yeah?
What's the definition of arms? What part of your arms meaning covered?
It's an interesting question. Again, I can't be 100% sure what the Yalkut Yosef is referring to, but I think that culturally, again, there's a question of culture at play. I personally don't think that even in a dati al kahila, men should be wearing sleeveless when they're davening, or like cap sleeves, that somebody should have at least sleeves. I can't promise that Rav Yitzchak Yosef, he might be referring to being, having at least to the elbow or something, but I think that's subjective to the kahila. I think in al kahila, I don't think it's inappropriate necessarily to daven in short sleeves. If somebody turned up in shul wearing, a basketball vest, then that's not appropriate. And I imagine that I wouldn't even need to say anything. Enough people in the shul, Baruch Hashem, would say something for me, so I could save my voice. But But I personally wouldn't, I don't objectively wouldn't daven in sleeveless, for example, ever, even if somebody was at home. He himself might be referring to more. He himself will be referring to more.
But
based on what I know about
the difference between sleeves above the elbow, or you mean to the wrists, I suppose. Difference?
I think I mean Mizrahi Melbourne, I think it's pretty normal to come in regular short sleeves. Not like cap sleeves, but like short sleeves. I think in our social circle, that's acceptable. In fact, it's the common practice, like every day. So yeah, in that regard. But he himself might be referring to something slightly longer. Okay, next one. Hey, Misha Eino Chash Batov, somebody's not feeling well. Mutar lo hitpalel im na'alei bayit l'raglav. Oh, heta for slippers. Somebody's not feeling well, they can wear slippers. Remember, we saw the whole thing about socks and not wearing the right socks or the wrong socks, and God forbid the pishtan, right? The wearing the cotton socks instead of the. So he says, until somebody's not well, they can wear their slippers. You don't have to put on shoes for davening. Somebody who's unwell, and he concludes here in Vav. One should not be davening Amida barefoot. Now, this is coming from an Israeli in Israel. Okay, it's not appropriate to daven barefoot. Especially if one's not wearing socks. And ideally, one should put on shoes before davening. If somebody due to honest is unable to, it's difficult for him. One may wear slippers. So if somebody's at home, you should not really be davening barefoot. And similarly, B'Tisha B'Av, Yom Kippurim, one could daven in slippers. Okay, so that's an interesting one. But obviously, non-leather shoes, house shoes, slippers would be acceptable if they're not leather to wear dafka on those days. Why? Because again, it's adding to part of the inoi. Yes, you don't look particularly mechubad, but that's kind of the general idea of the inoi on Yom Kippur and Tisha B'Av. Okay. They have here a little section on attire for women. We're good to go for that. Yes? Okay. Say that. Okay, there's not too much to say here, but here on top of page 341, the ad here brings here the Halichot Bat Yisrael, who speaks about attire for women. And that he says that basically there isn't really a difference in terms of requirements for men versus women. In source 34, he says, right, cleanliness, appropriate clothing, which you wear during tefillah. Best not to daven in a nightgown, in nightwear. And similarly, okay, this is very enlightened comment. I think this should be avodat habayit. Shouldn't be wearing their house, what do you call it? Their house apron. You shouldn't be wearing the house apron. Okay, so if a woman has a house coat, for an apron, basically, you should be wearing that for davening. Okay. Having said this, there are those who say that when it comes to tefillah, for women, that the obligations aren't as strict in the same way for men. Now, this is not in terms of hilcha erva, but this is in terms of what is considered mechubad. Certainly like a Haredi circle is wearing a jacket and a hat. So those requirements are not as rigid when it comes for women. Brings to the Rikshay Lev, this is Rav Nissa, right? In practice, when a woman davens at home, be careful about the following. If she wears a robe, it should be dignified. What she'd wear in public outside of her home. And some poskim say that although it's appropriate for them to wear dignified clothing, women are not accustomed to be as strict as men in this matter. Okay, and he quotes here Moshe Sternbuch, right? Moshe Sternbuch, Ab Beis of the Eda Haredis, right? He quotes it, we'll read it in the Hebrew because, jumped up a bit. There we go. In Ha'ara 40, because it's in Hebrew. Kach Amali Agaon Rav Moshe Sternbuch Shlita, right? Zel Shano. It says Rav Moshe Sternbuch, the Gaon of Beis Din of the Eda Haredis in Yerushalayim. They shouldn't be dressed in nightwear attire for Amida, the same way as men. It's not ma'akev. It doesn't prevent them from fulfilling the obligation. So Rav Moshe Sternbuch ruled that it's not as rigid as it is for men, which is an important point. Having said that, that's only in terms of what is considered dignified. When it comes to Hilchot Erva, when it comes to, covering us as what's considered Erva, so it's more complicated. For example, there's a question about Kisoi Rosh. Even if a woman's davening in her own home, does she have to wear Kisoi Rosh? So Rav Ovadia Yosef paskin that women, definitely married women, he actually pushed also for unmarried women, should wear a Kisoi Rosh when they are davening. He said it about unmarried women for Talmud Torah. Unmarried, he has a whole, Rav Ovadia has his own vort in Kisoi Rosh. If we look here in the Abiyah Omer, in page 342, so we obviously, Rav Ovadia Yosef has his Yechav Dat, which is his shorter tshuvot, which he did over the radio. Yabiyah Omer, where he has longer tshuvot. And he was asked about women if they have to cover their hair for davening. So he says, Nish'alti odot na'arot ravakot. I was asked about single women who usually go around without a head covering. They daven and they make brachos. Right, they go to school and they don't wear a head covering. Is that okay, basically, that single women do not cover their hair when they daven and learn? There's the one opinion which says that even when women are in the mikveh, they have to, when they make the bracha, they have to wear a kisei rosh. Behold, he disagrees that there's any proof from there. That was talking about a married woman who always covers her hair. And therefore, by the way, I'll just qualify, this is certainly not the mainstream custom in Ashkenaz. Women who are tovlot in the mikveh do not have to wear kisei rosh. In fact, we know that Ashkenazi women make the bracha at least after the first time of tovl. We usually know like the shla, they do one dip, then they make the bracha, then they do another dip. And they don't do it outside dress, they do it in the mikveh. So that's just an important point. So without head covering. Okay. Masha'en came Batulot Pnuyot, which is not the case when it comes to unmarried women, who usually don't have a head covering. It's not so clear that they have to cover their hair. He then qualifies it a little bit, and he does bring out that for certain things maybe they do, but ultimately he says that Isha Nisua, a married woman, has to cover her hair for when any brachos or anything she makes, even if she's in her own home. That's what Rav Ovadia wants. Not just tefillah, any brachos, any brachos, married women have to cover their hair. That's the psak of Rav Ovadia Yosef, and that's even if they're in their own home. Shlomo Zalman Auerbach wasn't as strict on it, and wasn't as insistent upon it. Source 37, it quotes him here, right, in Tefillah Hilchotah. Nashim nisuot nahagot lachasot roshan be'eich mipalot. So married women do have the minhag to cover their hair when they daven, even if they're in the privacy of their home. But me'ikar hadin, strictly speaking, according to the letter of the law, einan chayavot, they're not obligated. And he says in Ha'ara, he brings that in the Shem of Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. Kein Harani Hagan of Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. Shalo Kadat Shut Yabir Omer, right? In contrast to what we just saw in the name of Rav Ovadia, Shemin Hadin, who Asurat Levrach Palel below Kisoy Filim Beitan. Rav Ovadia was very strict about it. Shlomo Zalman Auerbach not as strict. My couple of cents, what it's worth is there are more important things to be insistent on in the home. That would be my couple of cents basically about this topic, especially in today's day and age. We've already discussed the idea of, even though there's obligation of kisei rosh and that hasn't changed, but the status of uncovered hair as being considered erva perhaps has changed due to the fact that sadly many women don't cover their hair, and in society at large many women don't cover their hair. So like that, I mean, I know we skipped the Nida volume, but there's a question in Hilchot Nida as well about when a woman's in Nida, does she have to wear a kisei rosh or not in front of a husband? And Rav Moshe Feinstein said if it's not going to cause shalom bias issues, she doesn't have to, right? If there's any shalom bias issues, she doesn't have to. And the Masorah I received is whatever she usually wears in the home. So even though but when it, that's okay. So the same thing will apply to Nida as well. She usually goes around the house without a hat on. Then when she's Nida, that's just how she dresses. When it comes to tefillah, I think there are more important things that we have to encourage, especially in today's day and age, and to insist on Kisoi Rosh. And especially when we've seen the Mikar Hadin, certainly in Ashkenazim, perhaps Einan Charavot. That was just my couple of cents worth on this topic. Okay, time is running away with us. We're not going to start 11. We're definitely Plineda going to start 11 next time, okay? But we've got to finish 10 now, okay? So let's talk about a final section here. Tefillah when traveling, okay? Right? It takes forever to get anywhere, from Australia to anywhere. It's amazing. When I flew in May, because now I go through Dubai, so when I flew in May from Australia to Israel, so I didn't miss a tefillah b'tzibur. It was incredible. It was incredible because I davened Ma'ariv Motzi Shabbos here. I ran out and I found a minyan in Ben Gurion at 9:30 a.m. Like it happened to be a minyan in the shul there. It was like incredible. Like you can do that. The other way, absolutely not. You miss loads. But it was incredible that going in that direction. Now through Dubai, I was able to like not miss a tefillah b'tzibur, which is great. But practically, we do have to daven on the road, and it's commonplace, especially when traveling from here. And the question is about how one conducts oneself as one has to travel on the road. So in fact, we saw this. We're on page 343, the Gemara Bracha Daf Lamed, source 38. We saw this a little bit previously. Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis told us, someone was riding on a donkey. And the time tefillah arrived. If somebody's able to hold onto the donkey for him while he's davening, then he should get off the donkey, let someone else look after it, and daven. And if not, then he can sit on the donkey. Obviously, why? Because if he gets down from the donkey and davens, there's no one to watch it, donkey will wander off. So if he's stuck, he's allowed to daven on top of the donkey. Sitting there, okay, on that place. Rebbe disagrees with the Chachamim and says, "Benkach or benkach." Either way, yeshepim kamay palel. The fisha ain't da'atam yeshevet alav. You should sit on top of the donkey, even if you have someone else who can hold the donkey for you, because you're traveling and ain't da'atam yeshevet alav. Your mind's not at ease. Your mind's not calm. Amarava v'item Rebbe Yeshua ben Levi halacha kaRebbe. Halacha follows Rebbe. We're all like Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi. Now, this is very important precedent for us. Even if you have the option of standing up and someone else is watching your luggage, if your mind is going to be, distracted, or who's got my luggage, who's got my suitcases, it might be better to daven sitting down or whatever it is. And that is the precedent which we see from this Gemara. Let's see how the Shulchan Aruch brings this to halacha in source 39. Also in Sadi Daled, says the Shulchan Aruch in source 39, someone's riding on a donkey. You don't have to get down and daven. Even if somebody can hold the donkey for you. You should daven whilst he is going. Okay? And similarly, somebody was on a boat, or gabi karan, or in a carriage, in a wagon. If you're able to stand, you can stand. But if not, you can't stand. Right? The seatbelt light's on. You sit in your place and you daven. Okay. And it's an important one. Okay. What about walking? What about if I'm not riding, I'm walking? Top of page 344. What if you're walking on foot? Mitpalel derech hilucho. You can daven while walking. If you don't have a choice, you're walking. You can daven while walking. Afim ein panav keneged Yerushalayim. Even if he's not facing Yerushalayim, even if it's not in a dangerous place. Why? If a person is going to stand in their place and daven, if you're stopped in the middle of a really bustling whatever journey, you're not going to be able to concentrate properly. It's going to distract you. But this is all subjective, as the Shulchan Aruch, based on the route, according to the place, according to that person's anxiety, and according to their basically a person's sense of calm and peace of mind. Okay, So nowadays it depends. We're talking here about somebody who's walking through a desert with a whole, caravan of people. And if they stop, even if it's not dangerous, they're going to be distracted that everyone's going ahead from them. But it's important subjectivity in this regard. He adds that some people stand at least for the bracha of avot. For the first bracha, some people are machmir to stand. If it's not in a place of danger, then it's appropriate to be concerned to at least stand for the first bracha. Okay. So we see that if somebody is going to be distracted, they can stay sitting. So if they're on a boat or whatever it is, they can stay sitting. What about in a car? So Piskei Teshuvah says that a car is different from the case of a sfina and a karon, because if you are driving, you've got to concentrate, and therefore this does not apply to driving a car, right? If you're a passenger, it might be different. If you're driving a car, there's no heta to daven while you're driving, right? We'll just see it quickly inside here. Beginning of source 40, Piskei Teshuvah. Somebody who's driving a car nowadays, Katvu Poskim is Manenu, the Poskim today wrote, there's no permit, there's no permission to daven whilst driving. We'll skip down to the next bold. Ki nahag rechev bismanenu, a driver nowadays, you have to be aware of your senses in order to be able to drive the car appropriately. And to skip back to the final piece of bold at the end of the source, ve'eno domeh is not comparable klal at all than agat agalot, to driving a wagon bismanehem in those days. Why? It was enough just with basic kavana, right? That just to make sure you're going on the right direction, shel harochev, of the traveler. Right, driving a car requires a lot more concentration than riding a donkey, and therefore there's no permission to drive a donkey, to daven whilst driving a car nowadays. So practically, what does one do? So if you're a passenger, we saw it's okay, but if you're driving, there's no heta, you've got to stop. The Isha Yisrael here in source 41 discusses if you have to stop the car. What if you're a passenger, let's say, and you have the option to stop the car? Do you have to stop? So he summarizes as follows in source 41. Isha Yisrael. If somebody who's driving in a car, autobus, in a bus, rakevet, a train, or any other form of transport, if you have the option to stop the car and daven amida, you should do that. But if by stopping the car or getting off, it's going to ruin your kavana, i.e., if you have to get off this bus and then wait for another bus, your amida is going to be really bothered anyway at the bus stop waiting for the next bus. Or it's a place which is dangerous to stop. Or you're on a public bus. And he said you can't just get off in the middle. Then you're allowed to daven even in the vehicle. Obviously, here we're talking about when you are not the driver. If you're able to, you should stand in the car. Now, again, when I say car, we don't mean a car, we mean a vehicle, right? So if you're on an Ege bus in Yerushalayim, we're on a bus here, on a tram, we're allowed to stand. And if you're able to, you should stand for davening. But even if the car's driving. But and at the very least, you should just try and stand for the first bracha of Amida, the bracha of Avos, right? Because we saw, remember that the Shulchan Aruch brought a Yesh Urim that you should at least stand for the first bracha if possible. And also for the places where you need to bow. So if you're able to do this easily, you should stand for that point. And similarly, also the end of davening, in order to take 3 steps back, if you're able to stand, you should stand for that. But if you're not able to stand, you're worried about falling over, right? Israeli bus drivers, then you're allowed to daven all of it even whilst sitting. Okay? So if you're able to stop, fine. But if you're stopping is going to ruin your concentration because you're on the road or whatever it is, then you should keep going. If you can stand, if you're on a vehicle where you're allowed to stand, that's better. Best at least if you can stand for the beginning and where you have to bow, and for the end is to take 3 steps back. But if you can't do that safely, then you should just daven the whole thing sitting. Okay. let's just end off by quickly talking about an airplane. So Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach was quite clear about what he thought as guidelines about davening on an airplane. He says it's best to daven in one seat. Here he is in the Halicha Shlomo in source 42. Hamid palel b'matos b'shat tisa. Somebody on a plane at a time of flight. Yitpalel tfilat shmoneh esrei b'yeshiva al makomo. Should daven when sitting in one seat. V'lo ba'amida b'ma'avarim. Not standing in the aisles. Kivan sheyufra sham al yedei ha'avrim v'shavim. Firstly, you are going to be disturbed by people passing by. U'makol makom, and nonetheless, lo hayta dat rabbeinu nocha ma'erichat minyanim letfilah b'shat tisa. Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach did not like people who arranged minyanim on planes. Ki hadavar mafriya l'sha'at anashim nitzim sham. It disturbed, it bothered the other people on the plane. He didn't like people who organized minyanim on planes. Rav Avadia Yosef held similarly. Source 43, and his son quotes the Yalkut Yosef. Amit palim barakevet over matar, someone on a train or a plane. Avshe safsalim gvohim mafridim. Even though they're high benches, hanosim mitztarfim leminyan asara. They do count for a minyan of 10. Everyone should really be in one place. Let's skip down though to the he'ara, the footnote there, at the end of source 43. He says in the footnote here, however, if davening on the plane disturbs the public, hanosim were traveling, like some people are sleeping on the plane, and davening with the minyan will disturb them, even if they're not religious, shouldn't make light of that. It's best not to daven for a minyan. We'll skip to the end here in the bold. V'zichroni, says Rav Yitzchak Yosef, I remember, Zachroni etzel Maran, right? Adoni, Avi Mori, Rabbi Zetzel. I remember my father, Rav Yosef, כשהיה נשא במטוס, לא הסכים להצטרף למניין שיעור במטוס. Rav Avadia, he says about his father, Rav Avadia Yosef, did not agree to join a minyan that they were putting together on a plane. And as we said, he also said that's the Pesach of Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, which we saw inside. So Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach and Rav Avadia Yosef were not happy about arranging minyanim on planes. Sheva Halevi, Rav Wazner, felt differently and said that if the plane are happy to do it, then you can do it. But you should make sure that you do it and make sure that it's agreeable with the conditions of the planes. He wrote to Elal, so just to read that here to end off, you shouldn't grant a large group, but he does say you can join as a minyan sitting in your seat. You can daven in your seat. You shouldn't take up the aisles. And in any case, if the seatbelt light goes on, you have to sit straight away. Even in the middle of your Amida, you must sit straight away in the middle. Finish the rest of your Amida sitting down. And if you're davening in a minyan together, when you got permission from the airline, and the light goes on, you have to, in the middle of Amida, go sit down, without delay, even in the middle of the Amida. So even he who allowed it with the tefillah still said that you should make sure that it's you go sit straight away according to the regulations of the airline. Chil Hashem, as well as the element of safety. So there are those who say differently. One who can read here, they have a Shlomo Volman, who has a slightly different way of looking at things. But ultimately, we see here that there's a bit of debate about this, but the bottom line is that really Kavana and Chil Hashem are the two most important things. And it seems sitting on an airline is better than standing if you're going to be in the aisles disturbing other people. That is regarding that. There's a little bit at the end about facing direction, which we're not going to do. Next week, please God, we will start volume 11, which is available to be bought at the office. I will bring those who come in person. Please God, more will come in person next week when it's better weather. And I'll bring some 11 so you can just take from me, then the office can invoice you directly, and we will continue next week. I'm starting a 4-part lunch and learn tomorrow, and it's to repeat it on Thursdays on medical dilemmas. So tomorrow and Thursday in the city, I'm doing on abortion. Next week I'm doing on surrogacy and egg donation, who's the halachic mother. The week after, I'm doing on, what am I doing on autopsies. And the week after that, I'm doing on brain death, organ donation. So you're all welcome 1 o'clock here on tomorrow, Tuesdays, or a repeat Thursdays at L1 in the city. And have a good evening. I've got to run tomorrow. Shakoach.